I don't just have a drawer of unfinished, unpublished manuscripts. I have a corner. So why am I now tackling a rewrite of a book that's actually been published before? I'm Holly Schindler, an award-winning author as well as freelance editor, writing coach, and writing instructor. And yes, I am finally tackling a project I have wanted to get to forever, a fiction podcast. The first season is a rewrite of this book, which technically published quite some time ago. Why am I doing that when I have so many other manuscripts that have never seen the light of day? More on that later. Right now, I want to tell you some things that I have learned editing another podcast in very imperfect, real-world situations. I think what I've learned in the last year is going to help other people figure out how to get started with their own podcasts. Okay, the other podcast is Pick for Profit. This is a podcast I started with my brother, who is an antiques and collectibles dealer, has been for quite some time. And it had gotten so in the last few years that a big part of his business was just offering advice to other sellers. And often those sellers were so grateful for the advice he had given. You know, his advice was so good that they would send him gifts. We were getting gifts to the house as thank yous. And we decided, we had to start a podcast to help other sellers who were all having, similar issues, just trying to get started selling online. This was a total learn as you go project. I mean, I had never opened Audition on my computer until I was editing the very first episode. Yeah. Okay, now to begin with, everybody knows the closet trick, right? When you're recording audio and you're in a home and you don't have a sound booth, probably your best bet is to try to get inside some sort of walk-in closet. What you want is to get away from hard surfaces, right? Your voice will bounce off of hard surfaces. It gives it that weird, echoey, boxy, boomy, recorded in a box sound that everybody's trying to avoid. And clothes or just soft surfaces will help absorb some of that echoing so you get cleaner audio. But my brother and I were going to record this podcast together, and there was no closet on the planet that was going to accommodate the two of us getting in it to record anything. We record this podcast in the living room. Yeah, that is about as imperfect of a situation as you can get, right? When you're recording audio, that is about as bad as it gets, just sitting in the living room and recording this podcast. Now, doing it that way, I have learned a ton about recording in less than perfect scenarios, right? And this is what I found. Okay, first of all, this probably goes without saying, but turn off everything else that could create a possible hum or background noise, a fan, a dryer, anything that is going to hum in the background. Soften as many hard surfaces as you can. If you've got a really large window, try putting a blanket over it, or at the very least, pull the drapes so that your voices aren't bouncing off the glass. Pop filters are a must. My brother and I also use these foldable mic isolation shields. Now, the initial assumption I had going into this was that I was going to need to buy the best mics I could possibly afford. But I quickly found out if my mic was too sensitive, all it wound up doing was picking up on all the flaws in the room. I also had a really hard time getting my brother's voice to sound decent. He doesn't really have a low voice, but there's almost kind of a weird rumble in it. So our official setup is a condenser mic for me, and then this thing for my brother. It is a really just basic Tascam dynamic mic. I think I paid something like $18 for this mic. And the reason I gravitated toward the name on this mic, if you're a certain age, you know what I'm talking about. I had one of those Tascam 4-track recorders, used to record my original songs on it. But the point is, don't think you have to use, the world's best mic or even a condenser mic. If you're having trouble with your mics, try a dynamic mic. You might even try the Tascam. Worked for us. Now, there's one more thing that I purchased, which is the key to making our podcast sound decent, even in this really, really imperfect recording setup. I'm going to get to that later, but for now I want to tell you just a little bit more about my fiction podcast. Now, of all of those manuscripts in that stack of mine, why am I pulling this book out start this podcast with. Now, Feral is officially out of print, and a book going out of print is not the sad state of affairs that it once was, thanks to independent publishing, right? As soon as a book goes out of print, an author can publish that book themselves and make it instantly available. I've done that. I have published my own out-of-print books, but I've never put up a book simply as is, right? As writers, we can't help ourselves. We've always got to tinker with everything. So I was asking myself, well, what do I really want to do with Feral? Now, there is a chapter at the very beginning of this book. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And it is a fully horror chapter. And I did know I wanted to lean into the horror elements even more. Horror is a funny genre, though. You know, it seems to have kind of fewer conventions than any other genre. It's just tell us something that scares us. And I know a lot of horror readers kind of like a triumphant ending. They like, you know, we confronted the monster and we emerged victorious. But I like the horror stories that have an unsettled, kind of creepy feel at the end. I like horror stories that end without the tidy bow. So I was thinking about all these things together, right? You know, horror, unsettled endings, and it felt like, you know, I was describing what you do when you sit around a campfire and you're trying to tell stories that just scare everybody, right? And I thought, okay, well, this story is actually kind of lending itself now to oral storytelling, which then lends itself perfectly to a fiction podcast. So now you're asking, what is this whole thing about? Okay, here is the official description of this reimagined story. Claire Kane is a fraud, a debt-ridden daughter who finished her dead father's abandoned manuscript and let the world believe she wrote it. But when she returns to Peculiar, Missouri, the strange little town her father once fled from in the middle of the night, she discovers his book was never really his either. Now Claire must decide whether she'll keep letting Peculiar's dark power right through her, whether she'll continue to chase the fame and fortune her father once sped away from, despite the feral cats watching from the tree line, the cave behind her farmhouse glowing stronger every night, and despite the creeping suspicion that Peculiar might be getting something in return. Okay, now drum roll. The piece of equipment that has helped our podcasting more than anything, this PodTrack P4. I cannot sing this thing's praises enough. This is quickly becoming one of the most used pieces of tech in the house. I'm completely serious about that. For each recording session, it actually will provide two different versions. One puts each mic on its own track, and the other will actually mix the mics together. I bought this thing so that I could edit his mic and mine separately, but it records so well, I actually like the two mics together on the same track. Kind of simplifies everything for me. I actually even use this thing now to record my sort of screenshot how-to videos. Basically, it's designed to record the spoken word, and it just gives super clean results consistently. Now, the one drawback it has, if it has any, it's that it absolutely eats batteries. When my brother and I first started using it, it would eat up batteries completely before we even got through recording one 20-minute podcast. So now we just plug it in, you know, either into a laptop or, you know, a power outlet, but just be aware that that does happen. I hope that's helpful if you are interested in finally getting that podcast of your own up and running. And stay tuned here because I will absolutely be posting more about the podcast and the podcast itself on this channel. Catch you in the next video. In the meantime, go record something.